This is to banish all of the academic air. I want to tell you that I grew up in Eatonton, Georgia, not Eatonville, and you'd be amazed at how many people just assume I'm from Eatonville. But actually, I'm from Eatonton, Georgia. I'm the 8th child of parents who were sharecroppers. And sharecropping, I don't like to use the word sharecropper because think about what comes into your mind when I say that word. What comes into your mind? There's no way you could see that underneath that word were my parents, who were excellent farmers, who really knew a thing or two about the land. You know, who if you were hungry and destitute and you found your way to our door, they could take care of you. You don't hear that under the word sharecropper. You could hear it under the word farmer. But in any case, I grew up not even in a town. I grew up in the countryside, thank goodness. A very beautiful countryside. And I heard these wonderful stories from my parents and my grandparents, because, you know, this was all before television. And people could still tell stories, and people still listened to stories. And they were so funny, and they were so wonderful, and they were so deeply about teaching us. So when I went to school, I thought that that would continue, that I would keep hearing those stories, I would keep feeling this connection to our ancestors through storytelling. But this didn't happen because as soon as I went off to school, and I loved school, I was always just a dedicated and happy student. But they didn't have stories there, really. They didn't have our stories. They had those things, the ones where Spot has the ball and, which just didn't compare, really. But that was what was considered worthwhile. Amazing, isn't it? So I went through, grammar school and high school and really loving it. I also am from an all-black community, so I knew absolutely everybody. Everybody knew me. In some ways, this is really similar to Eatonville, except that they actually had a village and we were out in the country and so far from each other that you could barely ever see anybody, which was fine with me because I loved the countryside. But in any case, I went off to before I went off to college, I was in high school. You have to go to high school first. And I was working at a 4-H club as a salad girl. Now, this is a place called Rock Eagle in my little hometown. And it was, of course, thoroughly segregated. And my job was to make these enormous salads for these white 4-H people who came to this place. And I could make these salads, and all of my classmates also made these salads, but once you put them out there, you had to disappear because you weren't supposed to be from behind, the counter. You couldn't do like this. You had to be well hidden. And the point of this actually is that was a year, I think my junior year in school, in high school. That was the year that Zora died. And I had no idea she had ever lived. I remember in my senior year, My next-door neighbor was already in college, and he brought over to me Oedipus Rex and a lot of the Greek plays, which I adored. And I had been reading Jane Eyre every year since I was, 12. But I had never heard of Zora Neale Hurston. I had no idea, none, that there were black women writers. And very little glimmering of an idea that there were black male writers. Every once in a while, somebody would recite something by Paul Laurence Dunbar. But we didn't even know about Langston Hughes, So I went off to school, to Spelman College, and nobody there had ever heard of Zora Neale Hurston either, which is amazing. It's a women's college. It has a wonderful history and many wonderful, truly great things about it, but nobody there had a clue. Then I went off to Sarah Lawrence, and again, nobody knew anything except two things happened there that were amazing. One was that my poetry teacher was Muriel Rukeyser, and she was quite wonderful to me, except that she taught white literature without any black people in it. And then years later, she wrote to me and she said, I knew Zora. She said, I knew Zora very well because one time she told me during the Scottsboro, disaster down in the South, she said, come south with me. And I said to her, well, Zora, I can't go with you south because I can't pass. You know what passing is, right? And she said, Zora said to me, well, honey, if you're with me, you're passing. But who knew? She did not tell me. And maybe it just didn't occur to her to say. When I was there, starting my writing, giving her actually my very first book of poems, which she helped me to get published, she did not think to say, here is this wonderful writer, Zora Neale Hurston, whom I knew. Isn't it incredible? I think that's really remarkable. Now, the other remarkable thing is that she gave this is still Muriel Rukeyser, my teacher, she gave my first volume of poetry to an agent to be published later, and she connected me with Langston Hughes. Now, this was such an incredible gift. And I gave him my first short story, which is To Hell with Dying, and he immediately wanted to publish it in a collection called The Best Short Stories by Negro Writers. Now, there is a story in that volume by Zora Neale Hurston, but I actually never noticed that because I was also really looking at the men, But the really strange thing about that was that when I went up to Harlem to meet him, and he opened the door, and he said to me, this is Langston. This is a man who was friends with Zora for years and years and years, knew her work very well. He looked at me, and instead of saying, which I think he should have said, you remind me of Zora, he said, you remind me of a young Ruby Dee. So, and there's a whole story about my relationship with Langston, which was very rich, brief, but very fulfilling. And I have spent a good bit of my time in thinking about the two of these people. I think about them as my aunt and uncle, and I will not have it that they had an argument and kept the argument going, because I just never felt that that was true. And even if it were true, I have felt that it was my responsibility as the descendant to bring them together so that we can understand we are not perfect beings. See how quiet it got? People said, oh, we're not. What a relief. We're not perfect beings. We have arguments. We hurt each other's feelings. We make each other suffer. We do. And yet, you know, we're human. That's it. That's what goes on down here, up here, out here. And in fact, I want to read you a poem. You know, when people invite you to speak at places like Barnard, they say, you know, this is like, it can be 2 years ago, 12 months ago, whatever, and they say, what are you going to talk about? And give us a title. And I used to just say, I don't know, and I don't have a title, and you deal with it. But now I just come up with anything, and I send it. So, so if you have, you know, that long title in your catalog or whatever, it is not, you know, it doesn't really connect necessarily. So anyway, so I was thinking that one of the things I wanted to do, I really meditated on this a long time and, you know, really thought about these two people that I love so dearly. I love them. They seem to me really fine, you know, really fine, good people. All their little flaws, you know, they don't really matter in the end. So I was thinking, well, Zora would have loved Langston, for instance, for this poem. This is a poem called God to Hungry Child. Hungry child, I didn't make this world for you. You didn't buy any stock in my railroad. You didn't invest in my corporation. Where are your shares in Standard Oil? I made the world for the rich and the will be rich and the have always been rich, not for you, hungry child. Now, how much truth